When my daughter-in-law became CEO of my late husband's company, she fired me at the dinner saying, "We're removing everything old and useless, including you, old dumb hag." Then my son walked in with 2 lawyers and said to me, "Hello, new boss." The words still echo in my mind like broken glass, each syllable cutting deeper than the last.
Before we continue, comment where you're watching from and subscribe to the channel. We'd love to see how far our stories are reaching.
I'm Susan Mitchell, 65 years old, and I never imagined that 4 decades of building something from nothing could be erased in a single evening. The company that my husband David and I started in our garage in 1983 had grown into Mitchell & Associates, a thriving consulting firm with over 200 employees. After David's heart attack 3 years ago, I thought I was protecting our legacy by transferring my shares to our son Robert. I kept my position as vice president of operations, believing that family loyalty would keep me safe. I was wrong. The annual company dinner was supposed to celebrate our best financial year ever. The Grandview Hotel's ballroom sparkled with crystal chandeliers, and our employees filled round tables draped in elegant navy linens. I had chosen my best dress for the occasion, a sophisticated charcoal suit that David always said made me look distinguished. As vice president, I was expected to give the opening remarks before dinner service began. Christina, my daughter-in-law, had been CEO for 8 months. Robert married her 2 years ago after a whirlwind romance that left the entire family breathless. She was everything I wasn't: young, polished, with an MBA from an expensive university, and a smile that could charm investors from across the room. When David died, Robert was drowning in grief and completely unprepared to run the company. Christina stepped in seamlessly, making decisions with the confidence of someone born to leadership. At first, I was grateful for her help. The business was struggling without David's steady hand, and Christina's fresh perspective brought in new clients and streamlined our outdated processes. She modernized our technology, recruited talented young professionals, and transformed our stodgy image into something sleek and contemporary. When Robert suggested making her CEO, I supported the decision. After all, she was family now. The trouble began slowly, so gradually that I didn't recognize it as deliberate. Christina started scheduling important meetings when I was visiting clients or attending industry conferences. My input on major decisions was sought less frequently, then not at all. When I questioned some of her choices, she would smile sweetly and explain that the business world was evolving beyond my understanding. "Susan," she would say, her voice dripping with false patience, "you've done so much for this company, but maybe it's time to trust the next generation." My office was relocated twice, each time to a smaller space further from the executive suite. My assistant was reassigned to other departments. Projects I had managed for years were transferred to Christina's hand-picked team of recent graduates, who treated me with polite condescension. When I complained to Robert, he would brush off my concerns with the same phrase every time. "Mom, Christina knows what she's doing. You need to trust her vision." That evening at the company dinner, I should have sensed something was wrong when Christina asked me to wait backstage, instead of taking my usual seat at the head table. The ballroom buzzed with conversation and laughter as employees enjoyed their cocktails and appetizers. I stood behind the heavy curtains that separated the staging area from the main dining room, reviewing my prepared remarks about our company's founding principles and future goals. "Ladies and gentlemen," Christina's voice rang out clearly through the sound system. "Thank you all for joining us tonight as we celebrate another successful year at Mitchell & Associates." I frowned. She was supposed to introduce me first, let me give the opening remarks as I had done for the past 15 years. Through a gap in the curtains, I could see her standing at the podium, radiant in a red dress that probably cost more than most of our employees made in a month. Her blonde hair was swept into an elegant chignon, and her smile was perfect as camera flashes captured the moment for our company newsletter. "Tonight marks not just the end of a successful year, but the beginning of a new chapter in our company's evolution," she continued. "As we move forward into an increasingly competitive marketplace, we must be willing to make difficult decisions about our future direction." My stomach began to twist with unease. This wasn't the speech we had discussed. Christina had never mentioned any major announcements for tonight. I reached for my phone to text Robert, but before I could find his number, her next words stopped me cold. "Effective immediately, We will be restructuring our executive team to better serve our clients and shareholders. Some positions will be eliminated, others will be redesigned, and we will be bringing in fresh leadership to guide us through the challenges ahead. The room fell silent, except for the soft clink of silverware against china, as servers continued clearing appetizer plates. I could see confusion on the faces of several long-term employees who had worked with David and me since the early days. Margaret from accounting was frowning deeply, and Tom from our legal department had set down his wine glass and was leaning forward intently. One of the most difficult decisions we've had to make involves a position that has outlived its usefulness in our modern structure, Christina said, her voice taking on a harder edge. The role of Vice President of Operations was essential when we were a smaller family-run business, but as we've grown and professionalized our operations, this position has become redundant. My blood turned to ice. She couldn't be talking about my job. Not here, not like this. Not in front of everyone we had worked with for decades. I gripped the curtain so tightly that my knuckles went white, my prepared speech crumpling in my other hand. Some of you may be wondering about our former Vice President, Susan Mitchell, Christina continued, and the way she emphasized former made my legs weak. While we appreciate her contributions during the company's early years, the time has come to move beyond outdated management styles and embrace the future. The cruelty in her tone was unmistakable now. Several employees were looking uncomfortable, shifting in their seats and exchanging worried glances. I could see Robert at the head table, but his expression was unreadable as he watched his wife dismantle my career in front of our entire company. "We're removing everything old and useless from our organization," Christina said with a cold smile that I had never seen before. "Including you, old dumb hag." The last words were delivered with such venom that they seemed to hang in the air like smoke. The ballroom erupted in shocked murmurs and uncomfortable silence as employees processed what they had just witnessed. I felt the ground shift beneath my feet, as if the very foundation of my world was crumbling away. But Christina wasn't finished. She gestured toward the entrance of the ballroom, where Robert appeared with two men in expensive suits carrying briefcases. I recognized them as corporate attorneys from the firm that handled our legal work. Robert's face was set in stone as he approached the podium, his eyes never meeting mine even though he must have known I was watching from behind the curtains. "Hello, new boss," he said into the microphone, his voice carrying clearly through the stunned silence. The words hit me like a physical blow. My own son, the child I had carried for 9 months, nursed through sleepless nights, and supported through every challenge of his life, had just publicly validated my humiliation. The boy who used to crawl into my lap when thunderstorms scared him, who had begged me to read him one more bedtime story, who had walked across the graduation stage and pointed to David and me in the crowd with pure joy on his face, that boy was gone. In his place stood a stranger who could watch his wife destroy his mother without lifting a finger to stop it. I stumbled backward from the curtains, my breathing shallow and my vision blurring with tears I refused to shed in front of them. The backstage area suddenly felt impossibly small, the walls closing in around me as the reality of my situation crashed down. 40 years of building this company, of sacrifice and dedication and love, had been erased in less than 5 minutes by a woman who had been part of our family for barely 2 years. Through the curtains, I could hear Christina's voice continuing with practiced efficiency, outlining new organizational charts and introducing the fresh leadership team that would be taking over various departments. She spoke about innovation and competitive advantages and market positioning, using all the right business school terminology to disguise the fact that she had just committed corporate matricide. I thought about David, about how proud he had been of what we built together. We had started with nothing but a shared vision and an unshakable belief that honest work and genuine relationships could create something lasting. Now our life's work was being handed over to someone who saw it as nothing more than a stepping stone to her own ambitions. The sound of applause filtered through the curtains as Christina concluded her announcement. I could picture her accepting congratulations from the board members and key clients who had been invited to tonight's dinner. She would be gracious and humble, deflecting praise while subtly reinforcing her authority and vision for the company's future. I had 2 choices. I could walk out onto that stage and fight for my dignity in front of everyone, creating a scene that would become company legend for all the wrong reasons. Or I could slip out the service entrance, preserving what little dignity I had left while giving Christina exactly what she wanted. My silent, shameful retreat. The decision was made for me when I heard footsteps approaching the backstage area. I couldn't face Robert right now, couldn't bear to see the look of pity or worse, relief on his face. I gathered what remained of my composure, straightened my shoulders, and walked toward the service exit with my head held high. As I pushed through the heavy door that led to the hotel's loading dock, the cool October air hit my face like a slap. Behind me, the sounds of celebration continued as Mitchell & Associates moved forward into its new era without me. The woman who had co-founded the company, who had nurtured it through every crisis and celebrated every triumph, had been discarded like outdated equipment. But as I stood in that dimly lit alley, surrounded by dumpsters and delivery trucks, something shifted inside me. The initial shock was giving way to something else, something that felt like molten steel flowing through my veins. Christina thought she had won tonight, thought she had successfully eliminated the last obstacle to her complete control over my family's legacy. She had no idea what she had just unleashed. The silence in my house was deafening. 3 days had passed since the dinner, and I hadn't left my bedroom except to use the bathroom. The phone rang constantly. Reporters wanting statements about my retirement, former employees calling to offer condolences, board members attempting damage control. I let every call go to voicemail. My reflection in the bedroom mirror showed a woman I barely recognized. My silver hair was tangled and unwashed, my face pale and hollow. The navy suit I had worn to the dinner lay crumpled on the floor where I had thrown it after driving home in a daze that night. I couldn't bring myself to touch it, as if the fabric itself was contaminated with the memory of my humiliation. Robert had tried calling 17 times. I knew because I counted each missed call before deleting his voicemails without listening. I couldn't bear to hear his voice, couldn't stomach whatever justification he had prepared for betraying the woman who gave him life. The thought of his face at that podium, cold and distant as he called Christina his new boss, made my stomach churn with a mixture of grief and rage. On Thursday morning, my neighbor Helen knocked on the front door. I could see her through the bedroom window, holding a casserole dish and looking concerned. She knocked for nearly 5 minutes before giving up and leaving the dish on my doorstep. The kindness of the gesture only made me feel worse. Helen had been my friend for 15 years, but now I was too ashamed to face her. What do you say to someone when your own family has declared you worthless in front of 200 people? The worst part wasn't the public humiliation, though that cut deep enough. It was the betrayal of trust, the slow realization that everything I thought I knew about my relationship with Robert had been a carefully maintained illusion. How long had he been planning this? How many conversations had he and Christina shared about the problem of his mother? How many times had they laughed together about my outdated methods and stubborn resistance to change? I found myself replaying every interaction from the past year, searching for signs I had missed. The way Robert's calls became shorter and less frequent. The way he stopped asking for my advice on business decisions. The way he would exchange glances with Christina whenever I spoke during family dinners, as if they were sharing some private joke at my expense. The media coverage was brutal. The Business Journal ran a piece titled, "Mitchell & Associates Modernizes Leadership Structure," which made it sound like my departure was a natural evolution rather than a public execution. But the comments section told a different story. Former clients and industry contacts expressed shock at how my termination was handled. Several long-term employees had already resigned in protest, including Margaret from accounting, who had been with us for 12 years. Christina was handling the fallout with typical efficiency. She had scheduled individual meetings with key clients to reassure them about continuity of service. She issued a company-wide memo emphasizing the exciting opportunities that lay ahead under new leadership. She even sent a brief statement to the Business Journal expressing gratitude for my foundational contributions to the company's early success, as if I were some distant historical figure rather than a living, breathing woman who had been discarded like trash. By Friday, the isolation became unbearable. I forced myself to shower and put on clean clothes, though the simple act of getting dressed felt like climbing a mountain. My reflection looked marginally more human, but my eyes still held the hollow look of someone who had lost everything that mattered. I drove to David's grave for the first time since the anniversary of his death 6 months ago. Woodland Cemetery was quiet, except for the sound of lawn mowers in the distance. David's headstone was simple granite with his name, dates, and the inscription, "Beloved Husband and Father." No mention of his business accomplishments or the empire we had built together. Just the relationships that had defined his life. I sat on the cold ground beside his grave and finally allowed myself to cry. The tears came in waves, washing away 3 days of numbness and replacing it with raw, overwhelming grief. I cried for the company we had built together, for the son we had raised who had chosen his wife over his mother, for the future I had imagined that would never exist. I transferred my shares to him, I whispered to the headstone. I thought I was protecting what we built. I thought family meant something. The wind rustled through the oak trees overhead, and for a moment I could almost hear David's voice telling me everything would be all right. But David was gone, and I was facing this nightmare alone. When I finally stood to leave, my legs were stiff from sitting on the cold ground for over an hour. As I walked back to my car, I saw a familiar figure approaching from the parking area. Robert was walking slowly toward David's grave, his hands shoved deep in his coat pockets and his face etched with misery. Our eyes met across the cemetery path, and for a split second I saw a flash of the little boy he used to be, the child who had scraped his knee learning to ride a bicycle and had run to me for comfort, the teenager who had called me crying from summer camp because he was homesick, the young man who had hugged me so tightly at his father's funeral that I thought he might never let go, but then his expression hardened, and he looked away. He waited by a distant tree until I reached my car and drove away, avoiding any conversation that might force him to confront what he had done. That weekend, I discovered that Christina's systematic destruction of my role had been more thorough than I had realized. When I tried to access my company email account, I found that my passwords had been changed, my corporate credit cards had been canceled, the parking pass for the executive garage no longer worked, even my name had been removed from the company directory and website, as if 35 years of service had never happened. The personal belongings from my office were delivered to my house on Monday morning by a courier service. 3 cardboard boxes containing my diplomas, family photos, the crystal paperweight David had given me for our 20th wedding anniversary, and the small cactus plant I had kept on my windowsill for 10 years. Everything that had made that space mine was reduced to 3 boxes that fit easily in my front hallway. Inside the largest box, I found a formal letter from the company's human resources department. The language was cold and legal, thanking me for my years of service and outlining the terms of my departure. My health insurance would continue through the end of the month. My company car needed to be returned by Friday. There was no mention of severance pay or pension benefits, which didn't surprise me. Christina was nothing if not thorough in her cruelty. That afternoon, my sister Janet called from Phoenix. She had seen the news coverage and wanted to check on me. Janet was 3 years younger than me and had always been the practical one in our family. She listened patiently as I told her everything that had happened, only interrupting to ask clarifying questions. "Susan," she said when I finished, "you need to fight this. What they did to you was wrong, and everyone knows it." "Fight what?" I asked. "Robert owns the company now. He has every legal right to make these decisions." "Legal right isn't the same as moral right," Janet said firmly. "You built that company with David. You made Robert who he is today. The least he owes you is basic human decency. Christina has him completely under her spell," I said. "He can't see past her manipulation. Then maybe it's time someone opened his eyes." After we hung up, I sat in David's study surrounded by the boxes from my office. The room still smelled faintly of his cologne, and his reading glasses were still on the desk where he had left them 3 years ago. I had kept everything exactly as it was, turning the study into a shrine to our life together. On his desk was a framed photo from Robert's high school graduation. The 3 of us were standing together, Robert in his cap and gown between David and me. We all looked so happy, so certain that our family bond was unbreakable. David's arm was around my waist, and Robert was grinning with the confidence of a young man who knew he was loved unconditionally. Looking at that photo now, I realized that the family it depicted no longer existed. The woman in the picture had trusted too easily and loved too completely. She had believed that goodness and loyalty were enough to protect the things that mattered most. That woman had died at the company dinner 3 days ago, humiliated and discarded in front of everyone she had worked with for decades. But something else was being born in her place, something harder and more calculating, something that understood that sometimes love wasn't enough, and that family loyalty could be a weapon used against you by the people you trusted most. I opened the first box and began unpacking my belongings, but this time I wasn't wallowing in grief. I was planning. Christina thought she had eliminated the last obstacle to her complete control over the company. She thought the old woman was gone, disposed of as efficiently as outdated office equipment. She was about to learn that she had made a terrible mistake. The woman she had humiliated in front of 200 people wasn't just Robert's mother or David's widow. She was Susan Mitchell, co-founder of Mitchell & Associates, and she had 40 years of business experience that Christina's MBA couldn't match. The war for my family's legacy was just beginning, and Christina had no idea what kind of enemy she had just created. The first call came on Tuesday morning from Patricia Williams, our former director of client relations. Patricia had been with Mitchell & Associates for 8 years and was one of the most respected professionals in our industry. Her voice was tight with barely controlled anger when I answered the phone. "Susan, I need to talk to you about what's happening at the company," she said without preamble. "Can we meet somewhere private?" We arranged to meet at a small cafe downtown, far from the business district where we might encounter current employees. Patricia arrived looking exhausted. Dark circles under her eyes and her usually perfect hair pulled back in a messy ponytail. She had always been impeccably professional, so seeing her disheveled told me everything I needed to know about the state of things at the office. "She fired me yesterday," Patricia said as soon as we sat down. "No warning, no performance review, no explanation beyond restructuring requirements. 17 years of perfect evaluations, and she escorted me out like I was stealing office supplies." My stomach clenched. Patricia was one of our most valuable employees, with relationships that had brought in millions of dollars in business over the years. What reason did she give? "She said my client management style was too old-fashioned for their new corporate image." Patricia laughed bitterly. "Apparently, building long-term relationships based on trust and personal service is outdated. The new approach focuses on volume and quick turnover." I had seen this pattern before in companies that prioritized short-term profits over sustainable growth. Christina was dismantling everything that had made Mitchell & Associates successful, replacing proven strategies with trendy approaches that looked good on paper but destroyed client loyalty. "It's not just me," Patricia continued. "She's been systematically removing anyone who worked closely with you or David. Tom from legal gave his notice last week rather than wait to be fired. Margaret from accounting was terminated on Friday. Even some of the younger employees are starting to look for other jobs because the atmosphere has become so toxic." I pulled out a small notebook and began writing down names. If Christina was conducting a purge of loyal employees, I needed to understand the scope of what she was doing. More importantly, I needed to document everything for future reference. "What about the clients?" I asked. "How are they responding to all these changes?" Patricia's expression darkened. "That's the worst part. Christina is making promises we can't keep, taking on projects outside our expertise, and pushing timelines that are completely unrealistic. The Hartwell account that you personally managed for 12 years, she's convinced them to expand their contract by 300%, but she has no idea how complex their requirements actually are." I knew the Hartwell account intimately. It was a family-owned manufacturing company that valued consistency and attention to detail above everything else. David and I had built that relationship slowly over more than a decade, learning their business inside and out. If Christina was overpromising on their expanded contract, the failure would be spectacular and very public. She's also been hiring consultants from outside firms to handle work we used to do internally, Patricia added. The costs are astronomical, but she says it's necessary to bring in fresh perspectives and specialized expertise. This was a classic mistake made by inexperienced executives. Instead of investing in training and developing internal talent, Christina was paying premium rates to outsiders who didn't understand our clients' specific needs or our company culture. It was expensive, inefficient, and ultimately unsustainable. Over the next 2 weeks, I met quietly with 6 more former employees who had either been fired or had resigned in protest. Each conversation revealed new details about Christina's mismanagement and the growing dysfunction within the company. The picture that emerged was worse than I had imagined. Marcus Thompson, our former IT director, told me that Christina had demanded access to all employee email accounts and computer files. She was monitoring internal communications and had created an atmosphere of suspicion and fear. Employees were afraid to express any opinions that might be interpreted as criticism of her leadership. "She's looking for disloyalty," Marcus explained. "Anyone who mentions your name or questions her decisions gets called into her office for what she calls alignment conversations. People are walking on eggshells, afraid they'll be the next one escorted out." Sarah Chen, who had managed our largest government contracts, revealed that Christina was violating several compliance requirements that were mandatory for public sector work. She had eliminated what she called bureaucratic overhead. But these weren't unnecessary procedures. They were legal requirements that protected both our clients and our company from serious liability. "I tried to explain the regulations to her," Sarah said, "but she accused me of being resistant to change and stuck in outdated thinking. When I insisted that we had to follow federal compliance standards, she said I was being obstructionist and fired me that afternoon." The most disturbing information came from James Rodriguez, our former head of business development. James had been tracking potential new clients for months, and he revealed that Christina had been making false claims about our capabilities and experience to win contracts. She told the Morrison Group that we had extensive experience with international expansion, but we've never handled a project like that, James said. When I pointed out that we would need to hire additional staff and develop new expertise, she said we would figure it out as we went along. That's not how professional consulting works, Susan. You can't learn on the client's dime. Each conversation added another piece to the puzzle, and the pattern became clearer with every revelation. Christina wasn't just changing the company's direction, she was destroying it from the inside. Her decisions were driven by ego and ambition rather than business sense. She was prioritizing appearance over substance, quick wins over long-term stability. I began keeping detailed files on everything I learned. Not because I had a specific plan yet, but because I understood that information would be my most valuable weapon when the time came to act. I documented dates, names, specific incidents, and potential consequences of Christina's decisions. I also began tracking the company's financial performance using publicly available information and insights from former employees who still had contacts inside the organization. The financial picture was particularly alarming. Christina had increased spending dramatically, while simultaneously alienating some of our most profitable long-term clients. She was burning through cash reserves that David and I had carefully built up over decades of conservative financial management. At the current rate of spending, the company would face serious cash flow problems within 18 months. But the most valuable intelligence came from an unexpected source. Jennifer Walsh, who had been my administrative assistant for 5 years before being reassigned to the mailroom, called me on a Thursday evening. Her voice was shaky with nervousness. "Susan, I probably shouldn't be telling you this, but I think you need to know what's really happening," she said. "I still have access to some of the executive calendars because they haven't updated all the security protocols yet." Jennifer had discovered that Christina was holding regular meetings with a business broker named Andrew Sullivan. These weren't routine consultations about company operations. They were discussions about preparing Mitchell and Associates for sale. Christina was planning to sell the company that David and I had built, probably within the next year. "She's been having the broker evaluate different scenarios," Jennifer explained. "They're discussing how to maximize the sale price by cutting costs and inflating revenue projections. That's why she's been firing experienced employees and taking on contracts we can't properly handle. She's trying to make the books look as attractive as possible for potential buyers." The revelation hit me like a physical blow. Christina wasn't just mismanaging the company. She was systematically preparing to sell it for her own financial gain. The purge of loyal employees, the risky contract expansions, the cost-cutting measures that compromised quality. Everything was designed to create an illusion of profitability that would appeal to buyers who didn't understand the underlying problems. I thanked Jennifer and hung up, my hands trembling with rage. Christina had manipulated Robert into giving her control of our life's work, and now she was planning to sell it to the highest bidder. The company that David and I had nurtured from nothing, that employed hundreds of people and served clients who trusted us with their most important projects, was being treated like a commodity to be flipped for profit. That night, I sat in David's study reviewing all the information I had gathered over the past 3 weeks. The scope of Christina's deception was staggering. She had convinced Robert that she was modernizing and growing the company, when in reality she was systematically destroying everything that had made Mitchell and Associates valuable in the first place. But she had made one critical mistake. In her arrogance and inexperience, she had underestimated the loyalty that David and I had earned over 4 decades of honest business practices. The employees she had fired weren't just former staff members. They were potential allies who understood the real value of what we had built together. I pulled out a legal pad and began writing names in 2 columns. In the left column, I listed every former employee who had contacted me with concerns about Christina's leadership. In the right column, I wrote the names of current clients who had worked with David and me personally over the years. Between these 2 groups, I had the foundation for something that could challenge Christina's narrative and expose the truth about what she was doing to the company. For the first time since that terrible night at the company dinner, I felt something other than grief and anger. I felt purpose. Christina thought she had eliminated the last obstacle to her plans by humiliating me in public and cutting me off from the company. She thought the old woman was gone, relegated to irrelevance and shame. She was about to discover that she had awakened something far more dangerous than an angry mother-in-law. She had awakened a woman with 40 years of business experience, extensive industry relationships, and nothing left to lose. The investigation phase was complete. Now it was time to build the resistance. The meeting with William Hartwell took place on a cold Wednesday morning at his office across town. I had called him directly, using his personal number that I had kept in my phone for over a decade. When his secretary announced that Susan Mitchell was on the line, he took the call immediately. "Susan, I was hoping you would reach out," he said warmly. "I have to tell you, I'm not comfortable with the direction things are heading at Mitchell and Associates." William Hartwell was exactly the type of client that Christina didn't understand. His family had built their manufacturing business over 3 generations, and they valued relationships above everything else. They weren't impressed by flashy presentations or aggressive sales tactics. They wanted partners who understood their business and could be trusted with their most sensitive projects. "I appreciate you taking the time to see me," I said as his secretary brought us coffee in his corner office. The walls were lined with photos spanning 50 years of business operations, family gatherings, and community involvement. This was a man who understood legacy and long-term thinking. "Susan, I have to be direct with you," William said, settling back in his leather chair. "This new CEO of yours is making promises that concern me deeply. She's talking about expanding our project scope by 300%, but when I ask specific questions about implementation, she gives me vague answers about bringing in specialized consultants." I had expected this. The Hartwell account was incredibly complex, involving custom manufacturing processes that required deep technical knowledge and careful coordination between multiple departments. It had taken David and me 3 years to fully understand their operations well enough to provide meaningful consulting support. "What specific concerns do you have?" I asked, pulling out my notebook. "She wants to compress our 18-month modernization timeline into 9 months, William said, shaking his head. When I explained that our production schedules can't accommodate that kind of disruption, she said her team would find creative solutions. "Susan, there are no creative solutions to retooling a manufacturing line. It takes the time it takes." This was typical of Christina's approach. She made commitments based on what clients wanted to hear rather than what was actually possible. It was a strategy that might work in some industries, but manufacturing required precision and realistic planning. "There's something else," William continued, lowering his voice. "She's been asking questions about our financial projections and market position that seem outside the scope of our consulting agreement. It feels like she's gathering intelligence for some other purpose." My blood ran cold. If Christina was collecting sensitive business information from clients under false pretenses, she wasn't just mismanaging the company, She was potentially engaging in unethical conduct that could destroy our reputation permanently. William, I need to ask you something confidential, I said. Have you been approached by any business brokers or acquisition specialists in the past few months? His eyebrows rose in surprise. Actually, yes. A man named Andrew Sullivan called last month asking general questions about our consulting relationships and whether we would be interested in working with new firms if our current arrangements changed. I assumed it was just normal business development. The pieces were falling into place. Christina wasn't just planning to sell Mitchell & Associates, she was actively preparing clients for the transition by gathering information that would make the company more attractive to potential buyers. She was using our existing relationships to enhance the sale value while simultaneously destroying the trust that had taken decades to build. Over the next 2 weeks, I had similar conversations with 4 other long-term clients. Each revealed the same pattern: unrealistic promises, requests for sensitive information, and subtle preparations for future changes in the consulting relationship. Christina was systematically exploiting every relationship that David and I had carefully cultivated over the years. But the clients weren't just sources of information. They were potential allies. These were business owners who had worked with David and me through economic downturns, industry changes, and major expansions. They trusted our judgment and valued our expertise. When I explained what was really happening at Mitchell & Associates, their reactions ranged from shock to outrage. "Susan, we've been doing business with your company for 15 years, said Rebecca Morrison, CEO of Morrison Financial Services. If someone is planning to sell the firm without consulting the clients who made it valuable in the first place, that's not just bad business. It's a betrayal of everything we thought the company stood for." Rebecca's company was one of our largest accounts, generating over $2 million in annual revenue. If she and other major clients withdrew their business, Christina's sale plans would collapse immediately. But I wasn't ready to play that card yet. First, I needed to understand the full scope of what Christina was doing and build a comprehensive strategy for exposing her. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source. Thomas Bradley, who had been our chief financial officer until Christina fired him 3 weeks ago, called me on a Friday evening. His voice was tight with anger and something that sounded like fear. "Susan, I need to meet with you immediately," he said. "I've discovered something about the company's finances that you need to know. It's worse than we thought." We met at a restaurant outside the city where we were unlikely to encounter anyone from our professional circle. Thomas arrived carrying a briefcase filled with documents that he had copied before being escorted from the building. His hands were shaking as he opened the files and spread them across our table. "Christina has been manipulating the financial reports," he said without preamble. "She's been moving expenses between quarters to create the illusion of improved profitability, and she's been recognizing revenue from contracts that haven't been completed or even fully negotiated." The documents told a devastating story. Christina had been engaging in what amounted to accounting fraud, using techniques that would make the company appear more profitable and stable than it actually was. When potential buyers reviewed the books, they would see consistent growth and strong cash flow. They wouldn't realize that the numbers were artificially inflated through questionable accounting practices. "It gets worse," Thomas continued, pulling out another set of papers. "She's been borrowing against the company's credit lines to fund her expansion plans, but she's not reporting these liabilities accurately. The actual debt load is nearly double what appears on the official statements." I studied the numbers, my accounting background helping me understand the implications. Christina had essentially been running a shell game with the company's finances, moving money around to hide problems while creating an appearance of success. It was sophisticated enough to fool casual observers, but would never survive a detailed audit by experienced financial professionals. "Why are you showing me this?" I asked, though I suspected I knew the answer. "Because what she's doing is illegal," Thomas said flatly. "When this comes to light, and it will come to light, people are going to go to prison. The company that you and David built is going to be destroyed, and hundreds of employees are going to lose their jobs. I can't let that happen without at least trying to warn someone who might be able to stop it." Thomas was risking his own career by sharing this information with me. If Christina discovered that he had copied financial documents before leaving, she could pursue legal action against him. But like many of the employees who had built their careers at Mitchell and Associates, he felt a loyalty to the company that transcended his personal safety. "What do you think I should do with this information?" I asked. "I think you should take it to the state attorney general's office," he said. "Financial fraud at this level is a criminal matter, not just a business dispute. Christina needs to be stopped before she destroys everything." I took copies of all the documents Thomas had brought, promising to consider his advice carefully. But as I drove home that night, I realized that involving criminal prosecutors would be a nuclear option that could destroy the company even if it stopped Christina. There had to be a way to expose her misconduct without bringing down the entire organization. That weekend, I called an emergency meeting of the informal network I had been building over the past month. Patricia Williams, Marcus Thompson, Sarah Chen, James Rodriguez, and Thomas Bradley gathered in my living room on Sunday afternoon. These were some of the most experienced and respected professionals who had worked at Mitchell and Associates, and together, they represented decades of institutional knowledge. "I've asked you all here because we're facing a crisis that goes beyond individual job losses or management disagreements," I began. "The company that we all helped build is being systematically destroyed from within, and if we don't act soon, there may be nothing left to save." I shared the financial documents that Thomas had provided, along with the information I had gathered from client conversations and other sources. The room fell silent as the full scope of Christina's deception became clear. She wasn't just a bad manager. She was actively engaged in fraud and manipulation that could destroy the company and harm everyone associated with it. "The question is," I continued, "what are we going to do about it?" "We could take everything to the authorities," Sarah suggested. "If she's committed fraud, she should face the consequences." "That would probably destroy the company," Patricia pointed out. "Even if we eventually cleared our names, the damage to our reputation would be irreversible. Our clients would flee, and most of the remaining employees would lose their jobs." "So what's the alternative?" Marcus asked. "Let her get away with it?" I looked around the room at these dedicated professionals who had given years of their lives to building something meaningful. They deserved better than to watch it all crumble because of one person's greed and incompetence. "There is another option," I said slowly. "We expose her to the people who have the power to remove her before she can complete the sale or cause irreversible damage." "You mean the board of directors?" James asked. "I mean Robert," I said. "He's the majority shareholder, and ultimately he's the only person who can stop this. If we can show him irrefutable evidence of what Christina is doing, he'll have to act." The room was quiet for a long moment as everyone processed the implications. Confronting Robert meant forcing him to choose between his wife and the company his parents had built. It meant shattering whatever illusions he had about Christina's competence and honesty. It meant destroying his marriage to save his family's legacy. "Susan," Patricia said gently, "are you prepared for the possibility that he might choose to protect Christina rather than face the truth?" I thought about my son, about the little boy who used to help me sort papers in the home office, who had grown up understanding that the company was our family's legacy and responsibility. That boy was still somewhere inside the man who had stood silently while his wife humiliated his mother in public. I have to believe that somewhere inside him, he's still the son David and I raised, I said. "And if he's not, then at least we'll know we tried everything before we take this to the authorities." The resistance was built. The evidence was gathered. Now came the most difficult part of all, confronting the son who had betrayed me and forcing him to see the truth about the woman he had chosen over his own mother. I called Robert on Tuesday morning, my voice steady despite the pounding of my heart. 3 weeks had passed since our encounter at the cemetery, and I knew he had been avoiding my calls. This time, I left a message that he couldn't ignore. "Robert, this is your mother. I need to see you today about the company. There are things you need to know about Christina's management that affect the future of everything your father and I built. I'll be at the office at 2 o'clock. You can choose to see me, or you can choose to remain ignorant while she destroys our family's legacy." I arrived at Mitchell and Associates 15 minutes early, carrying a briefcase filled with documents that would shatter Robert's world. The receptionist, a young woman I didn't recognize, looked confused when I announced myself. Clearly, Christina had instructed the staff that I was persona non grata. "I'm here to see Robert Mitchell," I said calmly. "He's expecting me." The girl made a nervous phone call. speaking in hushed tones before hanging up and directing me to wait in the small conference room near the entrance. It was a deliberate slight. Instead of being shown to Robert's office like a family member, I was being treated like a vendor or job applicant. Robert appeared 10 minutes later, looking haggard and older than his 32 years. His expensive suit couldn't hide the stress lines around his eyes, or the way his shoulders sagged with exhaustion. For a moment, seeing him up close, I felt a stab of maternal concern that almost derailed my resolve. "Mom," he said stiffly, closing the conference room door behind him. "What's this about?" I gestured to the chair across from me. "Sit down, Robert. We need to have a conversation that's 3 weeks overdue." He remained standing, his arms crossed defensively. "If this is about what happened at the dinner, I think Christina made her position clear. The company is moving in a new direction, and sometimes that requires difficult decisions." "Difficult decisions," I repeated, my voice carrying an edge of steel I hadn't used since he was a teenager testing boundaries. "Is that what you call publicly humiliating the woman who gave birth to you? Is that what you call standing by while your wife called me a useless old hag in front of 200 people? His face flushed red, but his jaw remained set. "You're being dramatic. Christina was explaining a business restructuring, not attacking you personally." I opened my briefcase and pulled out a thick folder. "Robert, I want you to look at something. These are financial documents from the company's records. Documents that show what your wife has really been doing with the business your father and I spent 40 years building." "I'm not interested in whatever conspiracy theories you've been developing," he said, but his eyes flickered toward the papers despite his words. "Sit down," I said again, this time with the authority of a mother who would not be dismissed. "You're going to look at these documents, and you're going to listen to what I have to say. After that, you can make whatever decisions you want, but you're going to do it with full knowledge of the facts." Something in my tone must have penetrated his defenses because he slowly sank into the chair across from me. I spread the financial statements across the table, along with the documentation that Thomas Bradley had provided. "These are the official quarterly reports that Christina has been submitting to the board," I said, pointing to one set of documents. "And these are the actual financial records showing where the money has really been going." Robert picked up the papers reluctantly, scanning the numbers with the basic financial literacy that David and I had insisted he develop during his college years. I watched his expression change as the discrepancies became apparent. "I don't understand," he said slowly. "These numbers don't match." "No, they don't. Your wife has been manipulating the financial reports to hide the fact that she's been borrowing heavily against the company's credit lines while moving expenses between quarters to create an illusion of profitability." I pulled out another set of documents. "Here are the contracts she's signed with outside consulting firms. In 6 months, she's spent more on external consultants than we typically spent in 2 years. She's paying premium rates for work that our internal staff could handle better and more efficiently." Robert's hands were shaking slightly as he reviewed the papers. "There must be explanations for these discrepancies. Christina knows what she's doing. She has an MBA from Wharton. An MBA that apparently didn't teach her basic business ethics," I said, pulling out the most damaging evidence. "Robert, your wife has been meeting regularly with a business broker named Andrew Sullivan. She's preparing to sell Mitchell & Associates, and she's been inflating the financial performance to maximize the sale price." The color drained from his face. "That's impossible. She would have discussed something like that with me, would she? When was the last time Christina consulted you about a major business decision? When was the last time she asked for your input on anything significant?" He was quiet for a long moment, and I could see him reviewing recent conversations and interactions. The truth was dawning on him slowly, painfully. "She's been telling me that the company was performing better than ever," he said in a voice barely above a whisper. "She said the changes she was making were necessary to compete in the modern marketplace. The changes she's making are destroying everything your father and I built," I said. "She's fired or driven away our most experienced employees. She's made unrealistic promises to long-term clients. She's created a toxic work environment where people are afraid to voice legitimate concerns." I pulled out my phone and scrolled to a saved message. "Yesterday, William Hartwell called me. He's terminating our contract because Christina promised deliverables that are impossible to achieve in the timeline she committed to." The Hartwell account represented $2.3 million in annual revenue, Robert. It's gone because your wife made promises she can't keep. Robert's face was pale as he absorbed this information. The Hartwell account had been one of our most stable and profitable relationships, built on trust and realistic expectations accumulated over more than a decade. There's more, I continued relentlessly. Rebecca Morrison is pulling her company's business because Christina has been asking for proprietary financial information that goes far beyond our consulting agreement. Sarah Chen warned me that Christina has been violating federal compliance requirements on our government contracts. We could face serious legal liability if regulators discover what she's been doing. Each revelation hit Robert like a physical blow. I felt no satisfaction in watching my son's world crumble, but he needed to understand the full scope of what was happening before it was too late to fix anything. "Why didn't anyone tell me about these problems?" he asked, his voice cracking with strain. "They tried to, but Christina created an environment where questioning her decisions was treated as disloyalty. She fired anyone who raised concerns, including our CFO who discovered the financial irregularities. The people who might have warned you were systematically removed from positions where they could speak truth to power." Robert stood up abruptly and walked to the window, staring out at the city beyond. "This can't be right. Christina loves this company. She's been working 16-hour days to make it successful." "She's been working 16-hour days to prepare it for sale," I corrected. "Everything she's done has been designed to create short-term improvements that will look attractive to potential buyers, regardless of the long-term damage to the company's reputation and sustainability." I pulled out the final piece of evidence, the document that would destroy any remaining illusions Robert had about his wife's motives. This is a preliminary valuation report prepared by Andrew Sullivan's firm. It estimates that Mitchell and Associates could sell for between $15 and $20 million, assuming current performance trends continue. Robert turned back to face me, his eyes wide with shock. $20 million? Based on inflated financial reports and unsustainable business practices, I said. When the buyers discover the real situation after the sale, they'll realize they've been defrauded. By then, Christina will have her money, and the company will be someone else's problem. The conference room fell silent, except for the sound of traffic passing outside. Robert slumped back into his chair, his head in his hands. For several minutes, neither of us spoke as he processed everything I had told him. "What am I supposed to do with this information?" he finally asked, his voice muffled by his hands. "You're supposed to be the man your father and I raised you to be," I said firmly. "You're supposed to protect the company that employs 200 people and serves clients who trust us with their most important projects. You're supposed to choose integrity over personal comfort." Robert looked up at me, his eyes red with unshed tears. "She's my wife, Mom. I love her." "Love doesn't mean enabling someone to commit fraud and destroy other people's livelihoods," I said. "Real love means holding the people you care about accountable for their actions. If I confront her with this, it could destroy our marriage." The irony of his statement hit me like a slap. "Robert, what do you think happened to my relationship with you when you stood silently while she humiliated me in front of 200 people? What do you think happened to our family when you chose to protect her feelings over basic human decency?" He flinched as if I had hit him physically. "I know I handled that situation badly. I should have said something. You should have done more than say something. You should have defended me. You should have stood up for the woman who sacrificed everything to give you the life you have." We stared at each other across the conference room table, 40 years of love and disappointment hanging in the air between us. Robert was crying now, tears streaming down his face as the full weight of his choices became clear. "I don't know how to fix this," he whispered. "You start by calling an emergency board meeting," I said. "You present this evidence to the directors and demand Christina's immediate resignation. You bring in forensic accountants to determine the full extent of the financial manipulation. You contact our major clients personally to apologize for the unprofessional conduct and assure them that changes are being made. And if she refuses to resign, then you fire her. You're the majority shareholder, Robert. You have the authority to remove a CEO who has violated her fiduciary duties and engaged in fraudulent conduct." He was quiet for a long moment, staring at the documents spread across the table. "She'll never forgive me. Maybe not. But our employees will still have jobs, our clients will still trust us, and the company your father died believing would honor his memory will survive." Robert stood up slowly, gathering the papers with trembling hands. "I need time to think about this." "You don't have time," I said, standing as well. "Every day Christina remains in control is another day she can cover her tracks, manipulate more financial records, or accelerate the sale process. If you wait too long, there won't be anything left to save." He nodded numbly and walked toward the door, then turned back to face me one last time. "Mom, I'm sorry. For everything." "I know you are," I said. "Now prove it." After he left, I sat alone in the conference room for several minutes, emotionally drained from the confrontation. I had done everything I could to open Robert's eyes to the truth. Whether he would find the courage to act on that truth remained to be seen. But for the first time in weeks, I felt something like hope. The son I had raised was still there somewhere beneath the layers of manipulation and misplaced loyalty. Now I would discover whether he was strong enough to choose duty over comfort, integrity over personal happiness. The future of our family's legacy hung in the balance, and everything depended on what Robert decided to do next. The call came at 6:30 Wednesday morning. Robert's voice was steady but tired, carrying the weight of a man who had spent a sleepless night making the hardest decision of his life. "Mom, I need you to be at the office at 9 o'clock. I'm calling an emergency board meeting, and I want you there when I present the evidence you showed me." I felt a surge of relief mixed with pride. Somewhere beneath the manipulation and misplaced loyalty, the son David and I had raised was still there. "Are you sure you're ready for this, Robert?" "No," he said honestly, "but it's the right thing to do, and I should have done it weeks ago. Christina is already suspicious because I spent yesterday evening reviewing financial records and asking questions she couldn't answer. I need to act before she realizes what's happening." I arrived at Mitchell & Associates 15 minutes early, using the employee entrance to avoid drawing attention. The building felt different somehow, charged with the anticipation of change. Robert met me in the lobby, looking exhausted but determined. For the first time in months, he reminded me of the idealistic young man who had graduated college with plans to honor his father's legacy. "The board is assembling in the main conference room," he said as we walked toward the elevator. "I've told them we're facing a crisis that requires immediate action, but I haven't provided specifics yet." The elevator ride to the executive floor was silent. I could feel Robert's tension radiating off him in waves, and I reached over to squeeze his hand. "Your father would be proud of you for finding the courage to do this." His eyes filled with tears he refused to shed. "I hope so. I'm about to destroy my marriage to save his company." The boardroom was filled with the 5 independent directors who provided oversight for Mitchell & Associates. These were respected business leaders from the community who had worked with David over the years. They looked confused and concerned as Robert and I entered together, carrying briefcases full of evidence. "Ladies and gentlemen," Robert began, his voice stronger than I expected, "I've called this emergency meeting because I've discovered serious irregularities in the company's management and financial reporting. My mother has evidence of fraudulent conduct that threatens the survival of Mitchell & Associates." The next hour was devastating. Robert methodically presented each piece of evidence, his voice growing stronger as he documented Christina's deception. The board members' expressions shifted from confusion to shock to outrage as the scope of the fraud became clear. Patricia Williams, whom I had secretly contacted the night before, arrived halfway through the presentation carrying additional documentation. She had spent years working with our clients and could speak authoritatively about the damage Christina's mismanagement was causing to our professional relationships. "The Morrison account terminated their contract yesterday," Patricia reported. "Rebecca Morrison told me she could no longer trust a company that made promises it couldn't keep and demanded proprietary information beyond the scope of our agreement." Thomas Bradley presented the financial analysis showing how Christina had manipulated quarterly reports to hide mounting debts and declining performance. The numbers were damning, revealing a pattern of deception that could have resulted in criminal charges if it had continued unchecked. When the presentation concluded, the boardroom fell silent. Finally, Harold Brennan, who had served on the board since David and I founded the company, spoke for everyone. "Robert, This evidence shows clear violations of fiduciary duty and potentially criminal fraud. We have no choice but to demand Christina's immediate resignation and begin damage control measures to protect the company and our remaining clients. I agree, Robert said quietly. I'm prepared to terminate her employment immediately and assume direct control of operations until we can implement proper oversight procedures. That's when the conference room door burst open and Christina walked in, her face flushed with anger and her eyes blazing. She had clearly been listening outside, and her carefully maintained facade had finally cracked completely. "This is absolutely outrageous," she said, her voice shrill with panic. "You people are staging a coup based on lies and manipulation by a bitter old woman who can't accept that her time is over." The board members stared at her in shock. Even in crisis, they expected professional conduct from the CEO of the company. Christina's public meltdown was destroying whatever credibility she might have had left. "Christina," Robert said quietly, "you need to leave this meeting. The board is conducting official business." "Official business?" She laughed bitterly. "You mean character assassination orchestrated by your psychotic mother who can't stand that I'm more successful than she ever was." The insult hung in the air like poison. Several board members shifted uncomfortably, clearly appalled by Christina's unprofessional conduct, but I felt something else entirely. A cold satisfaction that she was destroying herself more thoroughly than I ever could have. "Ms. Mitchell," Harold Brennan said formally, "we have reviewed extensive evidence of financial irregularities and mismanagement during your tenure as CEO. The board is prepared to vote on your immediate termination." Christina's expression shifted from anger to desperation as she realized the gravity of her situation. "Robert, you can't let them do this. I'm your wife. I love you. Everything I've done has been for us, for our future." Robert stood slowly, his face pale but resolute. "Christina, you lied to me about the company's financial condition. You've been planning to sell my family's legacy without consulting me. You've destroyed relationships with clients who trusted us for decades. That's not love. That's betrayal. I was trying to build something bigger," she said, tears streaming down her face. "The company was stagnating under old-fashioned management. I was modernizing it, making it more profitable." "You were committing fraud," Thomas Bradley said bluntly. "The financial statements you've been submitting are false. The contracts you've signed are based on capabilities we don't have. You've created a house of cards that would have collapsed the moment any buyer conducted proper due diligence." Christina turned to me, her mask of civility finally gone completely. "This is all your fault, you vindictive old bitch. You can't stand that Robert chose me over you, so you've been plotting to destroy me since the day we got married." The words should have hurt, but instead I felt only pity for this woman who had thrown away everything for short-term gain and personal ambition. "Christina, I didn't destroy you. You destroyed yourself the moment you decided that fraud and deception were acceptable business practices." "All in favor of terminating Christina Mitchell as CEO of Mitchell & Associates, effective immediately," Harold Brennan said formally. The vote was unanimous. Christina stared at the raised hands in disbelief, then turned back to Robert with one final desperate appeal. "Robert, please, don't let them do this to us. We can work through whatever problems exist. I can fix the financial issues. I can rebuild the client relationships. Just give me another chance." Robert looked at his wife for a long moment, and I could see the internal struggle playing out on his face. Part of him still loved the woman he had married, still wanted to believe that she could change. But the man David and I had raised ultimately prevailed. "Christina, you're fired. Security will escort you from the building, and your personal belongings will be delivered to your apartment tomorrow. All company credit cards and access codes are terminated effective immediately." The next few minutes were chaos as Christina alternated between threats, pleas, and accusations. Security arrived to escort her from the building, and her final words were a venomous promise to destroy the company and everyone in it through legal action. After she was gone, the boardroom fell quiet except for the sound of Robert's ragged breathing. He looked like a man who had aged 10 years in the past hour, but there was also something else in his expression: relief, as if an enormous weight had been lifted from his shoulders. "What happens now?" asked Sarah Hendricks, the newest board member. "Now we begin the process of repairing the damage," Robert said. "We contact every client personally to explain the situation and assure them of our commitment to ethical business practices. We bring in forensic accountants to determine the full extent of the financial irregularities. We rebuild our team with people who understand our values and commitment to excellence." Patricia Williams raised her hand slightly. "Robert, if you're serious about rebuilding the management team, I'd like to discuss returning to the company. Several other former employees have expressed interest in coming back if the work environment improves." Over the next hour, we developed a comprehensive plan for stabilizing the company and restoring its reputation. Robert would serve as interim CEO while we searched for a qualified permanent replacement. I would return as senior advisor to help with client relationships and institutional knowledge. The financial irregularities would be corrected, and we would be completely transparent with clients about the changes we were implementing. As the board meeting concluded and people began to leave, Robert approached me hesitantly. "Mom, I know I can never fully make up for what I put you through, but I want you to know that I'm committed to honoring Dad's legacy and everything you both built here." I looked at my son, seeing the man he was becoming rather than the boy he had been. "Robert, your father always said that character isn't defined by the mistakes you make, but by how you respond when you realize you've made them. Today, you showed real character." He hugged me then, the first genuine embrace we had shared since David's funeral. "Can you forgive me for choosing Christina over my own family?" "You didn't choose Christina over family," I said. "You chose what you thought was love over what you knew was right. It's a mistake that many people make, but few people have the courage to correct it the way you did today." 3 months later, I stood in my restored office on the executive floor, looking out at the city through windows that I had once thought I would never see again. Mitchell and Associates was stronger than it had been in years. We had retained most of our major clients, brought back our best employees, and implemented new oversight procedures that would prevent future abuse. Christina had indeed tried to sue the company for wrongful termination, but her lawyer withdrew from the case when he reviewed the evidence of financial fraud. She had found work with a smaller consulting firm in another city, and Robert had filed for divorce. He was learning to rebuild his life based on his own values rather than someone else's manipulation. The morning mail brought a letter from William Hartwell, announcing that his company was reinstating their contract with Mitchell and Associates. "The changes you've implemented give us confidence that we're once again dealing with a company that shares our values of integrity and honest communication," he wrote. Patricia Williams knocked on my office door, carrying coffee and wearing the smile that had made her so effective with clients over the years. "Susan, the Morrison Group called. They want to schedule a meeting to discuss expanding their contract with us." As I settled back into my chair, reviewing the day's agenda, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this moment. 3 months ago, I had been a broken woman, humiliated and discarded by the family I had sacrificed everything to support. Today, I was exactly where I belonged, protecting the legacy that David and I had built together. Christina had tried to erase me from the company's history, to reduce me to irrelevance and shame. She had underestimated the power of relationships built on trust and the loyalty earned through decades of honest work. Most importantly, she had underestimated the strength of a woman who refused to disappear quietly. The war for my family's legacy was over, and I had won not through revenge or destruction, but through the patient application of truth and the unwavering belief that integrity ultimately prevails over deception. The company would survive and thrive. Robert had found his moral compass, and I had reclaimed my place in the world I had helped create. Sometimes the best revenge is simply refusing to be erased, standing up for what's right, and trusting that the truth will eventually prevail. Christina had learned that lesson the hard way, and I had learned that it's never too late to fight for what matters most.